Why don't you have a seat right over there?
One of the most remarkable sentences for one of the most remarkable men ever, Chris Hansen. If you're watching this video, chances are you already know what he's all about. It all started with a career in journalism, digging into the world of crime. But once Hansen's curiosity towards online predators using the internet to meet children in real life became a project of his, there was no turning back. It changed his life forever. After the first adventure of To Catch a Predator, Hansen would investigate this crime for the rest of his life, dedicating program after program to putting heinous men behind bars, and hopefully getting some answers as to why. In today's video, we'll be doing a deep dive on Hansen's work on internet predators by digging deep into each of his Dateline specials pertaining to said issue, other related projects, and what made them so great and impactful. It all started with To Catch a Predator, a show based on adult men trying to meet and have inappropriate relations with underage kids. The social age of the internet was really starting to blow up during this time, and that also meant young kids were vulnerable to creeps grooming them. So Hansen wondered, how likely was it for such a scenario to happen? Hansen got the idea to do such a story after hearing about Perverted Justice from his friend Kevin Dietz. Perverted Justice was an organization set up by Xavier von Erich after he had heard multiple stories about youngins getting harassed online by grown men in Portland, Oregon, his hometown. In 2003, Dennis Kerr, aka Frag, stumbled upon the website and was moved by the mission, so he contacted von Erich and they started working together almost instantly. Frag owned a software company back then, so he knew his way around computers. Now, at this time, Perverted Justice was just a small vigilante group, not working with law enforcement. So when a potential predator made a date to meet up with a decoy, Von Erich would display that person's information on their website, along with an archive of the chat logs between the two parties. No arrest or anything like that. As a matter of fact, some law enforcement were against this idea, believing it to be a form of entrapment and dangerous for the decoys, with other critics of the organization echoing said sentiment. Hansen was aware of these allegations, more specifically, the ones about entrapment, and decided to look into them before working with the organization. After some investigation, Dateline found no truth in the entrapment allegations, so they decided to contact Perverted Justice to see if they would be willing to work with them on a story about computer predators, and they of course accepted. Dateline didn't want to work with law enforcement for their story because they wanted to know why exactly a predator would pursue an underage person online and to understand their motives. If Dateline had set up a sting where a decoy makes a date with a potential predator and then immediately gets arrested, it wouldn't have been anything new, original, or revealing. It wasn't about catching these men, it was about creating an understanding of their thought process. Speaking of which, the setup of getting these predators to the sting house made so much sense. First, Perverted Justice would set up a decoy account on any kind of chat room or other social website with an obviously underage person and just do a few interactions here and there, but they never reached out to any of the men first. They simply existed. Then a potential predator would message the decoy to start conversation, and somewhere down the line, the topic of sex would get brought up by the predator, and the decoy would go along with the conversation without going too far. The decoy would also clearly state that they were underage and bring up topics pertaining to youth during that life stage, including middle school troubles and having to deal with mom and dad, and they try to get the potential predator to acknowledge it in some way, so they wouldn't be able to deny they didn't know how old the other person was when they met up. Sooner or later, both parties would talk about the possibility of potentially meeting up and attending to the bedroom, but before a time and date was set, the decoys had to get an appointment approved by a higher up before any sort of situation could happen. Once everything was said and done, the predator made his way to the sting house, strolled his way inside, then eventually confronted by Chris Hansen, who would typically ask the predator a couple of questions. Granted, the predator didn't immediately dart out. The sting house was also surrounded and filled with hidden cameras, which allowed for the Dateline crew to see the predator from every angle. There were no blind spots where a predator could hide. Speaking of cameras, a question that often gets brought up about the show is, how can NBC legally broadcast these men without getting their permission first? And there's two reasons why. First, Dateline is considered a news division of NBC, and because of that, they're allowed to film people without their consent first, without having to blur their face or information. Secondly, it's totally legal to film a crime as it's happening, and since many of the men featured had broken the law by talking sexually to who they thought was a minor online, this gave NBC more legal leeway to broadcast these predators all across the nation. Well, the show had finally done its stings, and was finally broadcasted all across American airwaves, and it was a huge success in viewership and in ratings, for all the right reasons. Not only did it shine light on a very real issue, but it was quite entertaining due to multiple factors. First of all, Hansen was the perfect host for this show. He was genuinely curious about the matter at hand, and it hit close to home considering he was a father to tweens at that time, meaning his boys were vulnerable to anybody creeping on them while they prowled around the internet. He also had the perfect questions to ask the predators as soon as their exchange was initiated, but it was more than just what he asked that mattered. Hansen presented authority when talking to the predators with his cold and pushy demeanor and such formal attire. Such an appearance led many of these men to believe Hansen to be part of law enforcement. His professionalism was on full display too, because instead of just completely berating the predator or beating them to a pulp, he smoothly interviewed each one of them to get the information he needed. This mixture also intimidated the predators into talking, as if Hansen had something over them that compelled them to speak. The exchanges also made for some funny moments too, as Hansen is a bit of a troll. Another thing about these confrontations was that Hansen talked to a plethora of men to further investigate the multiple reasons why someone would commit such an atrocity, and this made for an interesting cast of characters. You had the ones that were quite nervous and answered every question Hansen asked out of fear, the endless excuse machines that tried to explain it was all one big misunderstanding, the silly ones, then of course the real messed up individuals. Not to mention, Perverted Justice would often have long exchanges with some of these men that lasted for months. So when Hansen confronted them, he would go on and on about the multiple things they brought up, making for great eye-opening conversations as to how these men get too attached to these decoys. Anyways, apart from the Predator confrontations, he also talked extensively with law officials, Perverted Justice, parents of young kids, teens, and other types of relevant groups to give viewers a big picture of this online phenomenon. Dayline made sure no stone was unturned. Everything was on the table with their investigation. These smaller segments outside of the confrontations are also fairly interesting too. As much as I do like Hansen talking to the defilers, it's nice to have some stuff in between to give audiences more information about the situation at hand, and what's happening, and what's been done about this cyber issue. Secondly, it's rewatchability. It's crazy how well the first episode set up the rest of the show and what was to be expected from then on. While every episode does follow some kind of formula, everything about it was so interesting, and the interrogations were so memorable that even if things got repetitive, fans could always rely on Hansen's interactions with these men to be something to remember, and then of course, meme on. You can dive into just about any episode without having to watch any of the ones preceding it, and not only enjoy it, but understand everything that's going on. So the show's simplicity also helped in its entertainment aspect. Now unfortunately, the first two episodes didn't involve law enforcement, so most of the men featured never got convicted for their heinous acts, but it made for good TV, and at the very least, exposed the predators for who they were. What's funny to me is, a few of the predators who showed up claimed they knew the whole thing was a setup despite no such thing ever being done before that point in time. The most peculiar of this in the first episode goes to Ed and NYC's interaction with Hansen. When Hansen popped out from his hiding place after Ed and the decoy had a small exchange, Ed immediately went on about how he knew the entire thing was a setup. Ed announced that he was a TV producer, which Hansen replied with, "It's interesting because I work in television as well." And according to Hansen, he assumed Ed knew who he was due to seeing his other reports. Before Ed departed from the Sting House, he stated he was intrigued by the show and would be down to help with any future productions. So to recap, this guy showed up quote-unquote knowing it was a sting, despite no such thing ever being broadcast to the public before, and on his way out, promised to Dateline he would like to work on the show if they did more stories. This man committed a crime by having a sexually explicit chat with who he believed to be an underage person, then nonchalantly strolled into the house, had a pleasant conversation with Chris Hansen, then left like nothing that he did was so bad. The goal of some of these predators never ceases to amaze me. While the first sting did sort of reveal this, the second sting really highlighted the fact that anybody could be a predator. It wasn't just this image we get in our head whenever we think about a disgusting slime ball that would willingly take a child's innocence. The show time after time caught regular looking men that had their own lives outside of preying on kids, like respectable jobs and even having a wife and kids. The show also had a slew of characters too. There were all types of predators out there that all had their own kinds of prowling. Well, after the first two stings that aired, it was pretty apparent that there was a real problem concerning the safety of children online, so Dateline worked with law enforcement for every sting moving further, so the predators would, hypothetically, face justice. It wasn't enough that these men were exposed for their crimes, something had to be done about it. Dateline was a bit apprehensive about this collaboration, figuring law enforcement may remove the questioning part and bring up concerns of entrapment. But once they set up boundaries so the show's formula would stay the same, new stings were on the way. These new stings also had an increased amount of production to them as well, with more hidden cameras hidden among the environment, getting on-site decoys that would lure potential predators to take a seat on that stool right there, and for one sting, they even had the meetup location be at a public beach, so predators would be less freaked out about beating inside a house where Dateline might be. It was incredible the amount of men they caught in these stings, and how they were able to handle all of it with only a few mishaps here and there. Even with Dateline hot on every predator's mind, they still ran right into NBC's little trap, so they could face the consequences of their actions. It was also baffling how, even in rural locations that had such a small population and people had to really go out of their way to drive to, men still came to try and crush the innocence of a young kid. To Catch a Predator was on a hot streak, so to continue the fun, Hansen decided to do a more personal, uncut version of the show known as Predator Raw, which to me is a wildly inappropriate name. Anyways, this version cut out the interview and material outside the stings from the episodes and replaced them with less edited versions of the interrogations, with Hansen's commentary on each of the predators featured on the episode being discussed. Personally, I think this is the best way to watch To Catch a Predator. Don't get me wrong, the other parts of the show like talking to law enforcement and kids and parents was insightful and helped connect the show to real life situations, but the interrogations beat these segments in terms of entertainment by a long shot, and not to mention, watching these segments nowadays, a lot of them feel outdated considering how much technology has changed and the many ways predators can talk to underage kids. These Raw episodes, though, give viewers everything they want. More of Hansen's insightful commentary and professional personality, and more footage of these men being questioned by Hansen. Both of these elements bounced off each other so well. Hansen's calm, soothing, yet interesting thoughts on the sting went hand in hand with the more laid-back feel of the less edited interrogations, and created a show you could relax and watch, yet still be very invested in. If Predator Raw isn't enough for you, years later, after TCAP ended, people were able to get their hands on completely unedited footage of the interrogations, meaning everything from the predator entering the house to them departing after Hansen's questions was there ready to be watched. No cuts, no music, just one camera shot showing the conversation between Hansen and the scum across from him. With how great the show was received, it comes as a big shock that the series was abruptly cancelled after only about 20 episodes. In one of the last episodes, set in Murphy, Texas, Bill Conrad, an assistant district attorney, had an inappropriate conversation with one of Perverted Justice's decoys, and since this man held power, the local police department, handling the executive part of the sting, rushed into his house with a warrant to capture and arrest Conrad. But the politician knew something was up even before they got there, and as police raided his residence, Conrad ended his life with his personal firearm. After the episode, Conrad's estate sued Dateline, but was later settled outside of court. Now, while Conrad's death certainly contributed to the show's cancellation, Hansen has also claimed another big reason why it was cancelled, due to Dateline already having a bunch of material they could edit and market, meaning it seemed unnecessary to them to keep making new material if they already had a lot of stuff to work with and broadcast. Well, that's To Catch a Predator for you. It was an absolutely wild TV show that not only shedded light on an upcoming issue for youth across the world and arrested despicable men, but it also provided many laughs and hours of entertainment for primetime audiences. Whether it be from the interrogations that range from real serious stone-cold conversations with the creepiest men around, to having a more casual conversation with one of the more odd ones, the cast of characters certainly served the show well and kept audiences coming back and back again. The in-between segments are neat too, and provide honest and eye-opening looks into what teens faced in cyberspace, among other revelations about communication on the internet. TV shows like this didn't come very often. Audiences would want to watch them again and again. Before we move on to the next show, I just wanted to bring up that Hansen wrote a book about his hit TV show a few years after the end of it, and while some of it is just retellings of the stuff that happened on TCAP, There are some interesting insights and behind the scenes stuff TV audiences didn't get to see during the original NBC broadcasts that are totally worth picking this book up for. I actually used this book to get a good amount of information for the expository section of this show, so I highly recommend it for any fan of Hansen's work. On April 15, 2015, Hansen decided to start a Kickstarter to create another show like To Catch a Predator called Hansen vs. Predator with a goal of $75,000. The page went into great detail about the numerous aspects that would come into play if the Kickstarter was successful, and there was even a ton of pledging rewards, starting from a small thank you e-card from Chris Hansen for $10, all the way to getting credited as an executive producer on the show's IMDb page, getting a call from Hansen, and actually meeting up with Chris Hansen to talk about the inside details of their investigations for $5,000. Hansen gave frequent updates as the days went by, and on May 15, 2015, the Kickstarter ended with a total of $89,068 reached, bypassing the original goal by over $14,000. Hansen and his team quickly went to work, trying to find out where to set their sting, and which law enforcement and underground watchdog groups to team up with. So not only could they interrogate the predators, but also make sure they faced justice. After a long period of no new announcements, Hansen confirmed on February 10, 2016 that they finished their first investigation and were sending details out to potential TV networks that would be interested in broadcasting the story. Over 6 months after this announcement, Hansen broke some big news. The show was going to air on Crime Watch Daily, and he would even do other investigations besides Hansen vs. Predator. Before we continue on to the show, I just wanted to mention, there's a lot of complaints on the Kickstarter page of people claiming they never got their reward for pledging money towards the project, which seems to be a very important part of the story. On Monday, September 12, 2016, the first episode of Hansen vs. Predator aired, and it certainly wasn't as good as its predecessor. You see, a lot of the content in this show felt like filler, like there wasn't enough footage of Hansen or the police interrogating the predators. You know, the main part of the show everybody watches these things for. It just felt like there was some unnecessary information thrown in. It didn't feel as serious or integrative as TCAP. I know everybody watched that show practically just for the interrogations, but the other stuff in between, like studies about children on the internet and showing how perverted justice worked, were actually eye-opening and entertaining. That kind of stuff is missing in these episodes though, and that's why I think they're just not as good as TCAP. Not to mention, each episode only has one predator, like, where's the multiple catches per episode like last time? Regardless, the interrogations were just fine all things considered. Hansen was still that same reporter he was years ago. Curious, authoritative, pressing, and trolling. I will say though, I think it's weird that Hansen heavily pressed Jesse Velez on the fact he sent a picture of his member to the decoy, which is totally something Hansen should have grilled him on, but he could have brought the other wildly inappropriate things Velez said in the chat, like all the acts he wanted to perform on the decoy, such as blanking his blank. Hey, speaking of the interrogations, one of the predators caught in the sting wasn't shown initially due to concerns of the guy's mental health until years later. After much time had passed after Hansen vs. Predator, Hansen decided to release the uncut footage of the predator interrogations, one of which being Vincent, known by the community as the Undertaker Predator. During the interrogation, Vincent broke down into tears and was uncontrollably sobbing, clearly showing some kind of mental disturbance. Hansen, being the professional that he is, was able to get Vincent to calm down and answer his questions. The whole video is a pretty interesting watch, considering the roller coaster of emotions the guy goes through in 20 minutes. Now, when I looked up a reason as to why the show didn't keep going, I got multiple reasons, so I'll just list all that I saw. Just for the record, these are all from Reddit, but the Hansen vs. Predator subreddit has some dedicated fans, so I'm inclined to believe them. Some seem to believe it may have not been profitable to keep the series going. Others go on about how Crime Watch Daily didn't want anything to do with this show after the first season for liability reasons. And some believe it's due to the lack of content because there wasn't a whole lot of fulfilling content outside of the interrogations, and the entire interrogations were shown for every episode, something TCAP hardly ever did. In my personal opinion though, I agree with RJ Royal Rules when he says HVP was dreamed up online, but it was a thing they couldn't willingly do when it came down to it. Mitch DWX also has a pretty compelling argument, stating NBC took the show and completely threw it away. Before we move on, you might have noticed the section is moderately shorter than the last section, and while that's largely because of the show's lack of content, It's also because there's only so much about the behind the scenes and the story of this show. As a matter of fact, if I didn't bring up the Kickstarter history of this show, this section would have been way shorter, so yeah. Just expect the following segments to not be as long because, quite frankly, none of them have had the same impact TCAP had when it first came out, so as such, there's only so much to talk about. In conclusion, HVP is far from being a bad show because, while it is still missing some of the magic from its predecessor, the part that everybody watched these programs for is still entertaining with how Hansen goes about the confrontations, the cast of characters made for some unforgettable moments, the interrogations with the police after the sting were interesting, and ultimately, a good deed was done by putting away vile men that preyed on youngins. In late 2020, Hansen decided to start a podcast called Predators I've Caught, with the first episode uploaded on major streaming services December 3rd of that year, and is still going to this day. A new episode was uploaded every Monday, and the reason I remember that is I would listen to it on my way home from my first semester of college after my lab lecture. Good times. Anyways, if you couldn't tell from the title, this podcast entailed Hansen talking about the men he's caught throughout the years, with each episode focusing on one predator. The structure consisted of a small introduction to the person Hansen was going to talk about, followed by his recountings of the sting and interaction with said predator, and at the end of the episode, Hansen would take a question from a fan and answer it with his insightful commentary. Personally, I think it's a good podcast. Hansen gives a quick recap to those unfamiliar with the predator to catch them up to speed, and offers some interesting rhetoric regarding the events of the sting, and even gives an update about what happened to said predator. Hansen even attempted to reach out to these predators, with only a few responding back. The ones that did reply weren't all that thrilled to hear from him.
Hey, Josh.
Yeah,
It's Chris Hansen. How are you?
I'm fine.
Hey, I wanted to talk to you if you had a minute, just to see what you've been up to since we first met several years ago in Greenville, Ohio, during our predator investigation.
No, thanks.
I'd just like to know
You're
how
getting rich off of stuff.
I'm sorry?
On October 29, 2020, Chris Hansen returned to predator catching with his new YouTube show, Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. Sort of. Have a Seat with Chris Hansen was a podcast he did where he would discuss certain investigative pieces, with 3 episodes of the show actually dedicated to the stings we're all familiar with. Anyways, the setup was a bit different this time. Instead of a decoy at the site to lure in the predator, the suspect was arrested as soon as they came in and then questioned by Chris Hansen. The 3 episodes are okay. Not having a decoy there ruined some of the magic for me, and the interrogations feel pretty tame, and Hansen doesn't really do any trolling. Not to mention, the conversation Hansen has with the law official in the first part has such a poor audio mix. It goes from a quiet, soft-spoken Hansen to a loud, overmodulated laptop mic from the officer. Overall, it's just very underwhelming considering the caliber Hansen's last 2 shows set, but to be fair, this was still during COVID time, so maybe there was only so much Hansen could do considering some of the restrictions during those times. One more thing, since this show was uploaded to YouTube, Hansen didn't have to censor himself like he did for national TV, and it was kind of a shock to hear the man that always said blank instead of profanities use certain swear words without someone blocking it. As mentioned before, there was only 3 episodes of Have a Seat with Chris Hansen that had him actually catching preds, but his work wasn't done just yet. Hansen decided to create his own streaming service in 2022 called True Blue, which had a focus on true crime content. It would feature an array of shows aside from Takedown, his new predator catching show. It seemed this was the show to catch a predator fans were looking for all these years. Hansen vs. Predator only lasted a couple episodes, it was full of filler and featured only 1 predator per episode, and Have a Seat with Chris Hansen only had 3 episodes with no decoy and felt kinda cheap. This was a full production with multiple stings and Hansen's classic interrogation skills and trolling back. The production value and everything else is just fine, but there's something missing from these things that just makes the show not feel as special or as good as TCAP. A lot of fans, including myself, chalked this up because of the execution of these things. You see, the original show had more than just fast-moving predators that wanted to come and go with the decoys, if you will. There was men that tried to form meaningful connections with the decoys, which would create interesting content for audiences because there would be a lot to discuss and reference from in the chat logs whenever Hansen confronted these predators. Not to mention, the interrogations aren't what they used to be either. In TCAP, the men would get comfortable with the comfy environment of the sting houses they had, and I think that made some men more vulnerable in accepting to giving up information to Hansen whenever he would question what they were doing there. In Takedown, the men are arrested immediately, and probably don't give the greatest answers considering they know they will be arrested, and are tense as hell due to being confronted and put in handcuffs before the questioning. Not to mention, only so many men during the original show knew they were going to be arrested after the interrogation, so they would spill their guts to Hansen willingly, not aware of what was waiting for them outside. The same can't be said for Takedown because they know what they say will be broadcasted and they will be tried for their crimes. Later down the line, Takedown did do the traditional style of pred catching stuff, but it still had the prominent issue of majority of these predators being fast movers and not wanting to answer questions because they know who Chris Hansen is and are aware of law enforcement. The community also seems to dislike the fact Hansen asks the same questions over and over again, which doesn't really help reveal why these folks do this type of stuff. It gets real repetitive. Now, I don't want to sound overly negative about this show, so I just want to say it is genuinely entertaining, and there's plenty of interesting and capturing moments throughout many of the episodes, or at least the ones that I watched. And there are some extra tidbits here and there to spice things up and make it more than just the Hansen confrontations we all become so familiar with. So I would still recommend this show to any TCAP or HVP fan. Anyways, it also seems fans have an issue with True Blue, the streaming service Takedown was initially on. You see, Takedown's episodes were originally on True Blue, but it seems the service didn't really have enough subscribers to keep it afloat, or enough to make new content. So the company decided to upload these exclusive episodes to YouTube to presumably make money off of ad revenue. It also seems certain episodes were straight up just deleted, angering fans that would like to have everything in one place. Now, I just want to mention, I got all this information from users of the Hansen vs. Predator subreddit, considering it's not like this has been officially documented, so I have to lean on the fans for this one. In conclusion, it's nice to see Hansen back creating content for the fans and getting predators prosecuted for their crimes, but in terms of entertainment value, it's lacking due to the way these stings are performed. Despite that, there are some golden moments here and there that are very memorable, and most of the episodes I've seen are decent and worthy of a watch. Also, fans seem to be kind of mad at the fact True Blue isn't turning out to what it was gonna be, and making its exclusivity meaningless when episodes make their way to YouTube for anybody to watch, and when they delete episodes so no one can watch them. Well, Takedown's the latest show Hansen's put out as of this video, but I wanted to bring up the community Hansen's shows have created. To Catch a Predator created a huge community around it, and the fans of said show went on to do their own things. Many YouTubers took it upon themselves to keep up with what happened to the Predators after they appeared on the show, with the biggest one being Joey's TCAP channel. These people do all kinds of homework and look up public records to see what the Predators are up to in the present, and have even dug up some interesting stuff from the past pertaining to these sick men. He even made phone calls to certain Predators just to ask them how their day was going.
Well, happy Thanksgiving. Everything going good?
Yeah. How do I know you?
Okay. I'm Jim Rutherford. Do you remember me?
No.
No. We were next to each other back in Dark County.
Okay.
And on the Dateline thing.
True dedication. My favorite style of content from these channels, like Joey's TCAP channel, is the complete package videos, which tell the whole story of the Predator and how they got caught in Hansen's web. These videos start out with a chat log between the man and the decoy, with members from the community narrating each party. Next, any phone calls between the two are played, then the show sting plays. And finally, the police interrogation plays, if there is one. There's also been a bunch of commentary channels where fans watch bits and pieces of an episode, or sometimes an entire unedited interrogation, and then provide commentary where necessary and crack jokes that only fans of these shows will get. One of my favorite members of the TCAP community is definitely Chris Hansen. He makes these EDM and electronic beats that are pretty good and mixes in samples from the shows to enrich the experience. I'm not joking when I say I had these songs on my music playlist and look forward to every time this guy uploads. It's some good stuff, man. Fans of this community don't even have to do stuff like make content about or based on the shows because They really know how to crack jokes about these programs. As I was doing research for this video, I ran into a bunch of comments from fans on various websites containing all kinds of inside jokes from the shows that I couldn't help but laugh my ass off as I was reading them. This is certainly one of the funniest fan bases I've ever been in. Speaking of which, the Hansen vs. Predator subreddit is full of a bunch of funny memes poking fun at the shows. It's worth going through the best posts of this community if you're a fan, because I guarantee you will laugh again and again. The Temple TCAP is another great place where fans of these shows congregate to discuss their thoughts about these shows and make interesting or comedic content to keep the community entertained. And now, the elephant in the room. There's been a number of YouTubers that do their own kind of predator catching and sting operations to keep creeps off the streets. Now, of course, not every single one of them is in it for the right reasons, nor do they employ the appropriate tactics in order to make sure the Preds face justice. But the channels that actually care about the situation at hand and get people arrested do such a good deed for communities all around the world. And quality predator catching comes in all shapes and sizes, and some try to replicate the original To Catch a Predator formula by inviting the man over to the house, having a decoy there to interact with them, then the catcher will come in and confront the pred on their actions. Some meet the predator at a public space and try to have a calm, casual conversation, and use multiple coercing techniques to get them to spill their guts. Others, however, are more direct and blunt about their intentions, and try to really illustrate to the predators why their actions are wrong. In any case, as long as the catchers actually get these people convicted, they're certainly doing a good job. And one last thing, film director David Ossett created a film about the legacy of To Catch a Predator, and also questioned if its portrayal of the matter was appropriate and meaningful, but it was only shown at Sundance in January 2025. MTV Documentary Films acquired the publishing rights to the movie, but it's still up in the air as to when it'll be released. Maybe I'll review it one day. In any case, it's still interesting to see TCAP still has critics even after its prime time. I guess that really shows its influence. Well, to be fair, Hansen is still doing predator catches along with a bunch of other people, as I mentioned just a minute ago, so even if TCAP is long gone, its presence never went away. Well, that's every Chris Hansen predator catching show. It's pretty amazing how big and influential To Catch a Predator was, considering not only the impact it had on parents and kids of yesterday, but how fans of the show still contribute to the community in their own ways, and continue to crack all types of inside jokes whenever a related video comes out. Some have even taken inspiration from the show and bust sick predators in their own way, and while not all of them are effective in their tactics, there are good catchers out there that do get people arrested and rightfully punished, so my hat's off to them. Well, that's all I have to say about these shows. Have an amazing day and keep your jeans in your jeans.